Stocking up on dry ice needed to keep the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine at minus 70 degrees, even in mid-air. At Amsterdam Airport, a large operation is gearing up to safely transport COVID-19 vaccines to destinations as far as Africa and Asia.
We have been preparing and we've been moving pharmaceutical goods for a long time. We've expanded our cool capacity and also our handling capacity, for instance, for these containers. So we are immediately ready.
But outside the airport, many in the Netherlands are far from prepared.
While the Dutch national airline is getting ready to distribute vaccines worldwide, millions here in the Netherlands are still reluctant to be vaccinated, and some say they will refuse the inoculation with COVID-19 altogether.
No, until we know what the side effects are, it's not meant for me.
Lex Bruggeman and his daughter Maxime are not against vaccinations but won't take a COVID shot for at least a few years until more information is available.
I'm sorry to say, I'd rather have a longer lockdown than have myself injected without knowing what it contains. I'm not a guinea pig, and for sure I won't let my children be guinea pigs.
The government wants to start its vaccination campaign in nursing homes in a few weeks. But even there, many are reluctant, as a recent survey shows. More than 60% of employees working with the elderly say they are having doubts about being vaccinated.
It's going to be a big challenge to motivate people to be vaccinated, and that's of course also our worry. I think it's a very serious problem, the COVID, and it's really necessary for the protection of our employees and our homes that the degree of vaccination is as high as possible.
With more than 12,000 COVID deaths, the Netherlands has a relatively high death toll. Despite the risks, employers and the government can't force people to participate in a vaccination program. Experts say to make a vaccination successful, the government should tell people that despite its rapid production, the vaccine is safe.
That they can explain how could this go that fast. All the investments that have been made worldwide, there are so many scientists who have completely sort of let down all their normal tasks and went focusing upon COVID. But this is a story that needs to be told.
While companies like KLM have been preparing for the arrival of the vaccines for months, the government has yet to start informing the public, causing concerns that other countries may have reached higher vaccination rates much sooner and therefore can also open up their economies earlier.
Countries around the world prepare for the rollout of a coronavirus vaccine. A group of experts is raising concerns that many governments are not publishing important data about COVID-19 and gender. Evidence is emerging of differences between women and men in terms of testing, hospitalisation and deaths. Professor Kent Boos is the co-director of Global Health 50/50 in the United Kingdom. That's one of the three organisations raising alarm, and he's spoken to my colleague Annette Young about the research.
Across all health conditions, we know that they affect men and women differently, and that's no different for COVID-19. What we're seeing, unfortunately, is the three leading vaccines haven't reported their results in a sex-segregated manner. And as you can imagine, this is problematic. Presently, we have these science by press release, which simply isn't good enough. They are gender blind, like too much of public health more generally.
The CDC is calling for universal mask wearing in all activity outside your home as COVID-19 cases surge to dangerous levels. More than 227,000 new infections of coronavirus were reported in the U.S. on Friday alone. This week, 11 states broke records for new cases reported in a single day. According to Johns Hopkins, more than 279,000 Americans have died since the pandemic began. The U.S. has also surpassed 14 million confirmed cases of the virus. Our Michael George reports.
As bad as it is now, projections coming from the White House show the death toll could be more than 500,000 by March. The Center for Disease Control issued its strongest call yet for masks yesterday in an effort to control the airborne virus. And this week, 11 more states broke records for cases in a single day. 100,000 people are in U.S. hospitals, and with each day, fewer and fewer beds become available.
It's one giant ball of anxiety trying to figure out where the next patient's going to go.
Donovan Betcher is a respiratory therapist in Wisconsin. Mavic Jardis is a charge nurse there.
It is difficult. Nurses are the first person that our patients see, and nurses are the last person that they will see in their last breath.
The strain on healthcare workers is made worse by people who don't do their parts.
You look on social media, there's a lot of talk about healthcare heroes and all that. Well, if you really want to respect people in healthcare or anyone that has to work right now, stay home, wear a mask.
In the United States, where the President-elect Joe Biden has announced that one of his first acts when sworn in next month will be to ask Americans to wear a mask for 100 days. Now, he won't mandate mask wearing, but Biden will request Americans do so starting on the day he is inaugurated, that is January the 20th. Now, Biden laid out those plans in an interview yesterday with CNN, where he also said he would be taking a coronavirus vaccine publicly. That part of plans to demonstrate a vaccine is safe. Now, that interview coming as the United States is gripped by a deadly surge in coronavirus. Over 2,900 people died of COVID-19 on Thursday. That is one of the highest daily death tolls in the US so far. Well, for more on what is happening in the United States, we can talk to our Washington correspondent now, Ketavan Gorjestani. Ketavan, first of all, Biden asking Americans to wear masks. Are people likely to heed that advice in your view? Because we do know that mask wearing has become quite a political issue in the States.
It is definitely a very political issue, and it has been almost since the start of the pandemic, very highly due to the president himself, Donald Trump, who from the beginning was trying to go against the push of public health experts to get people to wear masks. You saw him multiple times refusing to wear a mask. We saw just recently some holiday parties at the White House where people were simply maskless because at the White House there is no real enforcement of mask wearing. And so it has become really a dividing issue. Basically, to draw this in broad strokes, if you're a Republican, if you're a Trump supporter, you're very likely not wearing masks, at least not as much as public health experts would like you to. And if you're a Democrat, if you voted for Joe Biden, you're much more likely to be following the mandates in your state and to wear masks as often as it is required. As you said, this is not going to be a mandate because Joe Biden cannot do that. But he is trying to lead by example. He's trying to put out the messages that public health experts wanted to see coming from Donald Trump all those months. And he's trying to do that to maybe also help local officials push their own mandates. Because think about this, there are only so far 13 states who still to this day do not have a statewide mask mandate. All of those states are Republicans, and some of them, even the governors, the Republican governors, are fighting with local authorities, city mayors or county officials who are trying to put in local, smaller mask mandates. That's true in Florida, where the governor, Republican, big ally of Donald Trump, has banned local officials from enforcing mask mandates. And so Joe Biden thinks that if he puts out the message, he will get people on board with that mask wearing throughout the country.
Now, Biden also saying, Ketavan, that he will take a vaccine as soon as he can. He wants to persuade Americans that it's safe to do so because we know there is quite a lot of skepticism about vaccines in the States, isn't there?
Yes, public health experts say that at least 70%, even better if it's 75% of the country needs to be vaccinated in order for this vaccine to be really effective in protecting the nation as a whole. Right now, if you look at the recent polling, probably around 58, maybe 60% of Americans say they will take the vaccine when it is available. So we're still like 10% short of that 70% needed. And so that is why public health experts and leaders like Joe Biden, like Kamala Harris, are worried that people are not going to want to get that vaccine. We saw Joe Biden saying he'll take it. Kamala Harris said it also in that interview. And of course, you had just a few days ago, former presidents George Bush, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama all saying that they will take that vaccine in public, probably on TV, to try to bring back the trust in the vaccine. And that is because you have quite a bit of people here in the United States who are very distrustful of vaccines. You have the traditional anti-vaxxers on both sides, on the far left and on the far right. Then you have the problem and the issue of minorities distrusting the government because of past issues with testing on minority groups. And so that is going to be a big problem. And then there's the distrust in the Trump government, and that is one of the issues here in the U.S.
Resources down there doing good work as far as putting
NBC's Steve Patterson live in Silverado Canyon. Steve, what are you seeing on the ground there?
Shepard, this fire spread to more than 6,700 acres, as it has done now, really before firefighters were able to get any level of containment on it. They have done so now, but make no mistake, the fire danger is far from over. The so-called Bond wildfire actually started as a house fire. These strong Santa Ana winds picking up the flames, spreading it thousands of acres, forcing the evacuations of 25,000 people and injuring 2 firefighters. The good news tonight, most of those evacuations have lifted. There's a lull in the wind. The fire now burning really back off into the wilderness in canyons, and those 2 firefighters now out of the hospital and recovering. The bad news is that the threat is far from over, and that extends really to the entire region here in Southern California. 11 million people, as we speak, under the threat of a red flag warning. We spoke to a woman named Jean Page. She admits that against the advice of firefighters, she did not evacuate and was able to see the flames encroaching on her home. She gave us a tour of the backyard where there's this massive burn scar. Here's what she told us.
It was one of the most stressful days of my life yesterday. I didn't evacuate like I was supposed to, so I parked across the way with my dogs and all my things and watched the mountain burn, and it was doing okay. It was going to the right and up, but then it started coming down, and it was terrifying. But the firemen were amazing.
The bonfire now, again, 10% contained, but fire officials worry this will be far from the last fire of the season.
Nearly quadrupled in size in just a few hours yesterday, pushed by powerful winds. Officials say it started as a house fire. It has burned at least 6,400 acres and is just 10% contained. But some areas that were evacuated are now allowing homeowners to return. Jonathan Bigliotti has more on this California wildfire season that just won't end.
Wind gusts reaching 70 miles an hour continue to drive this fire near neighborhoods in the canyons of Orange County.
The wind was howling. It was
Bruce McDougall captured these images of flames that engulfed his neighborhood and destroyed his truck.
The firemen were here and they foamed the back of my house, and I think that saved it.
Bone-dry conditions gave the blaze plenty of fuel to grow. This is the second major wildfire to hit this area in the past 2 months.
You kind of felt like you were safe for at least a couple years from the brush that the fire had already come through about 2 months ago.
There are 500 firefighters from more than 30 different agencies battling the blaze. On Thursday, 2 of them were injured and taken to a hospital, but their conditions this morning are unknown.
This fire is driven by dry vegetation and high winds. We're talking about gusts up to 70 miles per hour. You can see firefighters here on the ground trying to stop this blaze from spreading.
You have a concern that maybe the fire is a little too close. That's enough. That's enough to have your belongings prepared and to evacuate.
Because of COVID, officials aren't providing shelters for evacuees. Instead, they're encouraging them to seek private safety with family or friends or go to a hotel. Local utilities cut power to 52,000 residents starting on Wednesday, and more than 32,000 remain in the dark Thursday. But even that precaution wasn't enough to prevent images like this, which have become sadly too familiar to the people of California.
A record-breaking 4 million acres have burned across the state so far this year.
Masker.
Guys, kembali lagi DAP meletus lagi pada pukul 3:10. Dia telah mengeluarkan belerangnya lagi pada 3:10 guys. Nih guys, kita saksikan bersama. Belerangnya keluar lagi dan meletus pada 15:10. Kita mengeluarkan belerangnya lagi guys.
This is baby Joshua. He was born just over a week ago at this makeshift shelter under a bridge in San Pedro Sula. His mother, 23-year-old Fabiola Ulloa, tells us her family lost everything during Hurricanes Eta and Iota, 2 powerful back-to-back storms that flooded the city last month.
We've been here for more than a month now. 8 days ago, my baby was born inside this tent. It was very hard. I was expecting to go to a hospital, but I had no choice but to give birth here.
Eta and Iota were 2 of the strongest storms of 2020 in one of the most active Atlantic hurricane seasons in recorded history. The impact of the storms in Honduras has been particularly devastating. Bridges and power lines collapsed, roads buried under mudslides, and entire towns flooded. Many are still underwater more than a month since the first storm hit. Geraldina Lara says she hadn't finished clearing the mud from the first storm when the downpours from Hurricane Iota flooded her home for a second time.
I think other people suffered more than myself. I thank God because even though I have nothing left inside my home, the 4 walls are still standing, and that's something.
Honduras is one of the poorest countries in the Americas. The destruction left by the storms has exacerbated an already critical situation and complicated efforts to curb the COVID-19 outbreak here. Relief workers say international assistance has become more important than ever and warn that in many ways the crisis is still worsening.
We need to have that emergency relief aid. We need to take care of those families that are completely displaced, whose homes have been completely destroyed. And it's not a small number. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of families, and they need food and they need some shelter, interim shelter, and medicine.
The Honduran government says state shelters are at capacity, meaning that thousands are now left to fend for themselves on the streets.
Well, first of all, to explain where exactly we are, Porte de Lira, where the march began, is right behind me, and to the opposite of me, behind the camera, lies about 6, or about a dozen rather, police trucks. So the atmosphere is kind of tense this afternoon, so we've made the safe decision to stay well upstream of the demonstration. But yes, as you mentioned, more than 130,000 people marched across France last Saturday. This weekend, we've seen several hundreds of people start right there at the Porte de l'Île behind me. Several thousands more are expected. Again, major movements converging into one protest, really. But the main demand, as you mentioned, is that global security law, which has been seen as so inflammatory by so many people here in France. Article 24, which makes it a crime for people to publish pictures of footage, rather, of police officers online or on TV with the intention of harming them. That would make it a crime to do so, and would make it punishable with up to 1 year in prison and 45,000 euro fine. We've had several rights groups saying that is really show that the Macron government is turning into a downward spiral into authoritarianism, and that would seriously curb freedom of speech and freedom of expression.
And Wasim, that is the major grievance today, isn't it, for the protesters? Just talk us through some of their specific demands.
So the government this week and last week as well, they pledged to completely rewrite Article 24. So before sending it over to the Senate, which is expected in the next few weeks, that they would completely rewrite Article 24 to try to find more common ground between the several parties, and to try to include really a provision that would just make it clear that this is not an attempt to curb freedom of speech or freedom of the press. But protesters that we've talked to, signs that we've seen so far in this protest today, say they want Article 24 to be completely removed in order to ensure that freedom of the press and freedom of expression is still something that they see here in France. I mean, last week we saw really dramatic pictures of a black music producer being beaten by several police officers just a few weeks ago. That really created lots of anger, and rights groups, journalists, lawyers say that is exactly the kind of pictures that we still need to see, so that we can still scrutinize the work of police officers, because yes, they are supposed to represent the law, but sometimes, there may be a few incidents, and they need to be held to account when it comes to those kinds of incidents.
Around 40 buses arrived overnight to take those who want to go to the permanent camp. The two families who have just arrived must be registered by the UN before they can also travel. The young woman we met the day before is getting ready to go to the next camp, along with her brother.
Here's my uncle and uncle. They already packed and put it in the car. And we're living today from the refugee. We are going to Amrukuba, and so we were happy.
The Sudanese roads are dusty, so the refugees are given masks for protection. These old buses have already carried thousands of refugees who have faced the violence of war.
Like people were dying, the bombs were coming from Eritrean border. They were destroying the houses and the downtown. They destroyed the downtown, so we were really afraid not to die. Then we escaped out.
My problem is that the army told me, come back. This is your country. You must serve in the army or you'll be shot. They were Abiy soldiers and Amhara forces.
What I've seen with my own eyes, there were corpses being burnt because they were Tigrayans. In a place called Abadi Shop, they killed them with knives and machetes. The Amhara forces did that. Some people in Meikadra were about to be killed because they were Tigrayans, some old people.
After several hours of waiting, they finally start the journey. Eris holds her most precious possessions over her knees. She was studying engineering. These are her diplomas. A grain of hope that might allow her to leave the camp if the conflict continues.
I am thinking to write to some of universities if I could get scholarships. And this is all my documents. I will going to scan them and I will going to email to some of the universities.
It takes them 8 hours to drive to this desert plain. Refugees are transported by the hundreds to Rukuba. Here, the shelters are basic for now. They live crammed on top of each other in the suffocating heat. A few hundred meters away, Ayeris, her brother, and their uncle find some shade under a water tank.
Did you bring water?
There was none.
Ayeris cooks shiro, a traditional Ethiopian dish bought from other refugees.
They didn't give us plates to serve the food.
We just have to use the pan.
Good idea.
They expected more help from the UN and the Sudanese government. Disappointed, Ayeris thought about leaving the camp.
The tyres that would normally be seen turning through the fields are now being used to fuel burning barricades. Fed up with being exploited and facing what they see as too much injustice, protesting farm workers have been out in force once again in Peru. Their calls for change have now spread further north, but they've also become increasingly violent, with clashes breaking out with police and a first casualty confirmed.
Han estado ahí parados y el proyectil ha llegado directamente a su cabeza y ha llegado y lo ha tirado al suelo y ha comenzado a sangrar.
Peru's interim president says his government will immediately investigate that man's death, adding that all is being done to maintain public order.
Y realmente es una tragedia. Nosotros no queremos que nadie muera en protestas por defender sus derechos laborales.
Talks between ministers and protest leaders have so far failed to reach any kind of agreement. But these recent tensions between farmers and the government have also triggered other headaches, with agricultural workers manning the barricades rather than any farm machinery. Many harvests have ground to a halt, and the long tailbacks of traffic on blocked highways have led to further clashes between motorists and the protesters.
A crackdown on so-called breeding grounds of terrorism. Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin confirmed this Thursday that inspections are to be carried out on 76 mosques suspected of promoting radical or extremist views.
There are in some concentrated areas places of worship which are clearly anti-republican.
What do you mean by that?
Places where imams are under surveillance by the intelligence services and where the discourse goes against our values, such as equality between men and women. Places where there's anti-Semitism, hatred against Catholics, hatred against France, funding that looks more than suspicious.
The investigations will look into the mosque's financing and the background of imams deemed suspicious and search for evidence, among other things, of Quranic schools for young children. The move comes as a response to recent terrorist attacks in France, including the beheading of teacher Samuel Paty and the killing of 3 people in a church in Nice. But the decision has been accused of unjustly targeting the Muslim community.
Out of 2,500 mosques and places of worship in France, we're talking about 76 mosques, so less than 3%. Unfortunately, it's the failing minority that makes the headlines. We feel the government's decisions are off the mark. Islam sells. It's the daily obsession of some politicians, some elected officials and some media, for whom we're their main business.
In October, French President Emmanuel Macron announced a law against religious separatism aimed at, quote, freeing Islam in France from foreign influences. The bill, which will be examined during next Wednesday's cabinet meeting, is widely seen by its opponents as pandering to the country's far right and prompted angry protests in Muslim countries and communities who have accused the French authorities of intolerance.
Hundreds of people come every day to this plaza in front of Congress in Buenos Aires to find food. Angélica Ramírez is a pensioner who says it's the only chance she has to find a daily meal.
When I cannot find some work to make some money, I come here to find food. I work as a cleaning lady. Most of my pension goes to my rent. This place saves me because if I have to buy all this food, I cannot survive. I'm worried about the situation in the country.
The coronavirus pandemic has had a devastating impact on this country. Argentina's economy was already in the red, but coronavirus has made it much worse.
Protests like this one are happening almost daily in Buenos Aires as poverty rates have increased in this past year. Around 60% of Argentine children are now poor, latest statistics show the government has increased food and cash handouts, but these people say it's not enough.
Argentina is struggling with inflation and recession. It's also renegotiating its foreign debt with the IMF. The government now is in desperate need of money, and that's why it is imposing a special tax on those who have over $2.5 million. Money raised by the tax is to be used to buy hospital equipment, fund welfare subsidies, and loans for small and medium-sized businesses, with the aim of increasing employment.
The new law is a request we make to the wealthiest people in the country. People, not companies, and we say the richest because of the things they own in the country and abroad. This also extends to residents in other parts of the world who keep their properties in Argentina.
But some sectors in the country say the new tax will deter investment and will promote capital flight.
When we come out of the pandemic, one of the fewest resources we'll have is capital. Capital with the will to invest, to generate jobs, to put the factories back to work, to help reactivate the economy.